So this is Justify Dissent. It's joint work with Georgi Egorov from Kellogg, Northwestern, Ingar Halan from Bergen, Akash Rao, who's here actually from Harvard, and Chris Roth from Cologne. I actually just gave the same talk at the department today, and it was a 90-minute talk, and I used the same set of slides. That's going to be interesting. So let's see how far we go, and then I'm happy to take questions and discuss some of the implications. So we're interested here in understanding, getting a better sense of the dynamics around dissent and the role of rationales in facilitating dissent. So across societies and over time, dissent has been an important force both for and against social change. And many times, rationales supplied by political entrepreneurs, by the media, or by social movements often enable dissent, but it shape the public debate. Just to pick a couple of recent examples of narratives, arguments, rationales that have been put forth. For example, in the US, related to the previous talk, narratives that with police reform would increase violent crime have been used to generate opposition, to facilitate opposition to the movement to defund the police. On the other side of the political spectrum, narratives that immigrants are violent criminals have been put forth and used to generate opposition to immigration to the US. Why do these rationales facilitate dissent? Typically, people think of a mechanism of persuasion. Basically, there's a rationale that is made popular, is put forth, and some people might be persuaded. They say, "Oh, I was supporting the police reform, but now there's this good argument. I'll change my mind." This is persuasion, right? That's the typical argument. Now, but it turns out that many times dissent is not limited due to a lack of support for a cause, but rather because people are they're worried about the consequences of expressing their views. So it's not like I need to be persuaded privately. It's just like I have my opinion, but I just don't feel comfortable expressing it. 62% of Americans today agree with the statement that the political climate these days prevents me from saying things I believe because one might find them offensive. Okay, so this is where we start from. This paper, we're gonna propose and experimentally examine a different mechanism of the persuasion by which rationales can facilitate dissent, the expression of dissenting opinions. This is going to be what we call the social cover effect. What do we mean by the social cover effect? I guess I can just shrink this a little bit. There we go. What do we mean by this? Think about this first example I gave, opposition to defunding the police. Many settings, you might be, particularly in more liberal settings, some person might be feel uncomfortable expressing that they're against the defunding the police because they might think that others might think of them as being intolerant or against racial equality. Now, suppose an argument is popularized claiming that the defunding the police would actually increase violent crime, and that's an argument that people know about and it's been popularized. Now, more people may now publicly oppose defunding due to one persuasion, traditional mechanism, I was convinced by this argument and I changed my opinion. It hasn't changed my calculation about the social cost of expressing it, but I'll be more willing to pay the social cost because now I feel more strongly about this topic. Persuasion. There could be anticipated persuasion. Regardless of my persuasion, I might think that others, my audience, some of them will be persuaded, so that changes the social cost I might face expressing this view. Or that could be the social cover, which is the fact that's what we're studying here, which is, well, when there's this argument, if my audience knows that I'm being exposed to this argument, there's a chance that they think that I might be persuaded by it, that now I might have a better reason to oppose it, right? In the absence of an argument, of a convincing rationale or a plausible rationale, people attribute my opposition to this movement to my lack of support for racial equality. But now that could be another reason. So maybe they might judge me less negatively for expressing my position if now I have this argument, that they know I've been exposed to. So, and I can feel more comfortable expressing my position if I can attribute it to this rationale, okay? Separately from these other mechanisms. So that's the logic for this one. Now for the other example we gave, similarly, some people look more on the right side of the political spectrum, might feel like that they say that they're anti-immigration, or that you want to deport undocumented immigrants. People might think that you're a xenophobe, right? Now, suppose there's an argument that is popularizing, claiming that immigrants commit violent crime, okay? Then more people might feel comfortable expressing it, because now others might think that they have another reason for expressing this other than their intolerance or xenophobia. Now, it's interesting because the social cover might give a cover for some people who actually legitimately had an opinion but felt uncomfortable saying it, but it might also give an excuse for people who actually, who want to pretend that that's why they're doing it. So you could see why in one case someone might actually be worried about crime and now uses this as a social cover, or someone who actually doesn't worry about crime but is feel like they need an excuse. And so there's this interesting aspect here too. So what do we do here? There's no way I'm going to be able to talk about everything because it's 17 experiments. So, but basically run some experiments, the main ones on social media, on Twitter, where we isolate this mechanism of social cover, and we study the power and limitations of rationales in facilitating dissent, studying liberals' willingness to publicly oppose the movement to defund the police, and how the availability of a rationale facilitates this willingness, and conservatives' willingness to publicly support the immediate deportation of all undocumented Mexican immigrants. Those are the two things we're going to be studying here. We are going to isolate the social cover effect of rationales from other confounds and other mechanisms. And then we're also going to study the other side, the audience. How does the audience evaluate, sanction, and judge people for expressing their views in the absence or in the presence of these rationales? Okay, so I'm going to study both sides. Okay, liberals. So, and I'm going to skip the details of the experiment. I'm just quickly here just describe that we studied. We wanted to run an experiment where people were doing a real decision instead of just stating what they think and so on. So the ideal outcome would be whether they want to tweet something or not, right? The problem of having an actual tweet outcome is that we just didn't want to start a whole campaign and ask people to tweet something, things start kind of spreading out. So what we did is that we created an app that allowed us to, if the participants to participate in the experiment had to download this app, and this app allowed us to access their Twitter account and post things on their behalf, right? So basically this experiment, they would authorize it. We asked them if they allow us to schedule a post, some specific tweet to their account, and that's the outcome we're looking at. Now the question is, we still didn't want to start this campaign, so what we did is that we told them, hey, this will be posted if and when and if we reach survey respondents in all counties. But that's the trick. We knew we were not going to be able to reach survey respondents in every county, so we told them, hey, if and when we get this number of people, we'll post this in an account. And if we don't get this by a certain date, we just delete this. So we never posted it, but the participants didn't know that. So there's an element of misleading the participants. Sorry?
No. Arguably, I would ask the same as well. Like IRB, this is for IRB reasons, right? The question about...
No, we're weighing the pros and cons of two approaches. One where you actually do what you say you're going to do, but you start a campaign, versus lead them to think that you will post without posting. And ethically, the second one seemed to be more appropriate, and IRB was their view too. Okay, experimental design. So every respondent was shown a rationale, which is an article written by a Princeton professor, a criminology professor, showing the scientific evidence that defunding the police actually increases violent crime. Okay, so this is a pretty credible rationale because the Princeton professor, scientific evidence. This is considered good, credible things for a rationale. And this was published in the Washington Post, which is a liberal outlet. Okay, so everyone sees that and decides whether to join a campaign privately, a campaign to oppose defunding the police. So you join it privately; it's not going to be posted anywhere on your Twitter or anything. Among those who decided to join, they are shown the article a second time. Okay, so condition on seeing the article and saying I'll join this campaign privately, you're shown the article a second time. And we vary what we do is to vary the availability of the social cover, holding everything else constant. How do we do this? Well, persuasion is held fixed because everyone in the experiment sees the article. So if the article has an effect on your position, it's held fixed. Anticipated persuasion is held fixed because we ask them to authorize a tweet. I'll show you the actual tweet. But the article is always linked. So if you think that the article might have an effect on the audience and changes the social cost, that's held fixed. So what we do is that the only thing we manipulate is whether the tweet communicates that the respondent themselves was exposed to the rationale before or after joining the tweet. Because I saw the tweet, my audience will also, I saw the article, my audience will see the article, but the only thing that varies is whether the audience thinks that I saw the article before joining, right? Is the social cover. Both things are true because everyone sees the article twice. So that's the trick we did. Okay, so it's very simple. There's two conditions. The cover condition, no cover condition. And so in the cover condition, people are asked, would you authorize us to post this tweet in your account? I have joined a campaign to oppose funding the police, the link. Before joining, I was shown this article written by a Princeton professor on the strong scientific evidence that defunding the police will increase violent crime, and this is Washington Post link. The no cover condition is identical, just one word changes. Instead of saying before joining, said after joining. That's it, that's the only manipulation, one word. Here's what we find. Condition on joining the campaign privately, without the cover, 57% of them authorize the tweet. Okay, so a bunch of people who privately support it don't want to tweet about it, indicating consistent with the presence of some stigma. Now, when you provide the cover, this goes to about 70%. Just by changing this one word, substantial amount, significantly more people are willing to authorize this tweet. Saying, because they can say that they saw it before. Of course, there's a bunch of potential confounds still. You could say, well, could there be something going on? The fact that you say before and after could have an effect on the willingness to tweet, because it's weird to say that I posted something after instead of before, and so on. So we run a placebo experiment with an identical manipulation in a non-stigmatized domain, which is a petition to conserve the Amazon, and find no effect of before and after. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be what's driving. Related, could it be that people think that the cover tweet it would be more persuasive because of the language and so on? So that's the reason why they're more likely to post it. So we run another experiment where we ask people to predict how many of their followers will join the campaign for one version or another version. We don't find any difference. So it doesn't seem to be driven by that. We also run a whole set of exercises asking people what type of tweets they would choose hypothetically and why, and ask them why. Just code the language they use, the text they use, and see if people evoke the social cover mechanism in an unprompted way, and they do. Oftentimes, people say, well, the reason why I would like to have a before language is because it provides me with the social cover. And I'm happy to describe this in more detail because there's a lot of work on that we did in the paper, but see, it's going to take a while. Now, the receiver side, right? The person who's observing, because we say, seems that people are more comfortable expressing these types of opinions when they can say that they have seen a rationale before. Now, if our story is right, the way people judge others will also be consistent with that. So we run an experiment with Democrats here. So people who we think will be the ones sanctioning this type of opinion. And the experiment is very simple. Each respondent is matched with someone from the previous experiment, and we show one of the two tweets. That person was willing to post this or that. That's it. Just show one of the tweets, the two versions. It's just a screenshot. And then we have these pre-registered outcomes, social judgment, the willingness of that person to deny the bonus payment to the matched participants, like really burning money that could go to them. It's not between you and them. It's just burning the money. We don't want that person to be paid. So it's social judgment. Some measure of the inference about their motives, which is, we're saying, right? We think of them as less intolerant because they might have if they had a rationale, because maybe they have another reason. So we ask people to guess the probability that person made a donation to a pro-black organization, just to see if that changes as well. And we have some open-ended text analysis. here's what we see. So the no cover, 47% of these participants, liberal participants, are willing to burn the payment to the other person as a punishment. This drops to 39.7 when you know that the other person, just in the group that where you're shown the tweet with the cover. This also changes inferences about the person's type. You're more likely to think that person donated to a pro-black organization as opposed to this one. Again, still a minority because he's still making this inference potentially about their type, but less so. So it seems to be working on both sides. An interesting implication here is how good the rationale needs to be to serve as social cover. Because here's Princeton professor, Washington Post, scientific evidence. It works. But how high does the bar need to be for people to feel comfortable and not being judged in this setting? So we run a separate experiment where the only thing we changed, that we don't say that it's a Princeton professor and we don't say scientific evidence anymore, and it doesn't work anymore. So on Twitter, the liberal circles, it seems like in this setting, the bar is pretty high. Because unless you can evoke scientific evidence in here and explicitly say, and a Princeton professor, criminology, and so on, people are not willing to give you a pass anymore. So it's similar with the two types of arguments. Just because I have a little time, we did something very similar on the Republican side, and they're willing us to actually sign a petition to immediately deport all undocumented Mexican immigrants. So something pretty extreme on the right side. And instead of using a Princeton professor, we used the equivalent on the right, which is Tucker Carlson from Fox News, a video that they had. So similar type of manipulation, cover or no cover. I saw this video or not from Fox News, documenting how undocumented immigrants commit more crime, and it works pretty well. Again, majority not willing to post, even condition on privately supporting the campaign, but there's a big effect from being able to say that before making a decision, you saw Tucker Carlson making that argument. And again, the same thing happens in terms of judgment. This is a Democrat judging a Republican. I think it's a surprising result because a Democrat judging, or a Democrat and independent, judging someone who posted a tweet, right? Wanted to post a tweet to deport all illegal Mexicans, all undocumented Mexican immigrants. 80% of them are willing punishing that person. That makes sense, right? What I thought was surprising that even then, I thought these people were going to be very inelastic, right? You still see some of them start giving a pass, right? Oh, maybe they have a good reason to do it. Maybe they believe Tucker Carlson, maybe they're worried about crime, maybe they're really gullible and so on. So it seems to work. And even here, when you ask them their beliefs about whether that person made a donation to a pro-immigrant organization, the baseline is pretty low, right? Not surprisingly, but it still works. So it changes both sanction and inference. Just to wrap up, we also ran these types of experiments with much larger samples, representative samples outside of Twitter, just for external validity, and we find we replicate the same patterns there. Just to wrap up, we find that these rationales facilitate dissent, on both sides of the political spectrum. People are more willing to express dissent when they can appeal to a rationale. And they change social inferences and sanctions, right? Because people interpret differently the motives behind your expression, and they might punish you differently. But this only works if the rationale is considered credible. The question, so that brings up some interesting implications. For example, what characterizes a credible rationale? Okay, and how can leaders of movements or institutions undermine the use of rationales by challenging the credibility of the rationale? That's kind of an interesting implication. For example, if you're a leader, say, of a regime, and you want to make sure there's no dissent, and you know that people might feel more comfortable expressing dissent if they can appeal to a rationale, you might want to challenge directly the credibility of rationale and say, hey, if you use it, anyone who evokes this type of rationale had an ulterior motive. It must mean something, so that you just make it harder for people to evoke the rationale. And one way to do it is by saying, well, if you found this rationale, it must be that you were looking for that. So you had an agenda behind it. That kind of nuance might actually matter, and we think it's interesting. I'm happy to engage more. You know, a concrete implication, for example, is how to debunk fake news on social media. You know, many times the approach that social media platforms go for is by saying, you know, before you post something that has been challenged, Facebook might say, hey, be careful, this has been challenged. Are you sure you want to post this, right? Now, the question is, if we have a social cover story going on, it might not be enough to tell the person privately that this is fake or challenged, because if the audience doesn't know, you can still pretend that you didn't know, right? I'm just using this. So it might be important to say, hey, we're telling you, and the audience, your followers will know that we told you, right? That might be a crucial step. So it's something to consider. I'm out of time, so thank you.